Hello and welcome to Mekelle Foresight. This is Mekelle Nagy, producer and host of the show. My guest today is a writer and activist on issues of Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the Horn of Africa. Today, we will focus on the ongoing war in Ethiopia, and we will zoom into the recent executive order of the US President Joe Biden and its implications. Yosief Ghebrehiwet, welcome to Mekelle Foresight.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks also for our listeners. Thank you.
Let's start with the more pressing situation now, the toll the famine in Tigray is taking. There are reports as many as 600 people per day are dying. This is very worrying. Why is this being allowed to happen in this century?
All right, okay. I know it's rather puzzling and at the same time tragic, because this shouldn't have happened. For example, I believe that had the Biden's executive order had happened, let's say, 4 or 5 months ago, it could have averted this disaster right now. That's why I feel many people, in fact, have talked about, if you have observed, have been commenting on the content of Biden's executive order, how sweeping it is, how this time Biden means business and so forth. But to me, more than the content, what matters to me most is the timing. The timing. Is the timing right? Is it too late? Let me put it this way. Is this executive order made primarily with Ethiopia's unity and stability? That phrase, that comes up again and again in mind, or with the genocide in Tigray in mind, or we could put it in a different way. What has alarmed Biden right now that he has to come up with this executive order? Is it the spread of the war all over Ethiopia, or is it the mass starvation in Tigray? Is it primarily to stop the war from spreading all over Ethiopia, or is it to stop the starvation inside Tigray? If we ask this question, so we have this. I have this conflicting views on Biden's executive order. I'm glad that he brought up. He did this, but still, what I feel is the West, in general, is the West, not only the Biden administration, but in general, the West seem to be missing unwittingly or wittingly, or because it doesn't give a damn, or because, as I said, it prioritizes Ethiopia's unity and stability above and over the genocide of the people of Tigray. I don't know, but it seems that it always misses that the main factor in the ongoing tug of war between the West and Ethiopia, it is timing, Timing. I want to underline that. It's timing that they have been missing. Either out of laziness, or because they don't care, or because they don't understand the problem. Now, in fact, that's why, when you raise the issue of why doesn't the world give a damn, about this thing, and I'm trying to put it as a timing problem. If the West had acted earlier, this could have been avoided. Now that it is happening, what it has to do now is not enough. The executive order of Biden is not going to stop it unless it is backed up by some other measure steps. Let me go to the timing problem in order to explain this phenomena. Think about this. The enemies, or let me call them the axis of evil, those being Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Amhara. In fact, it's those forces that have understood the problem of timing, they have took the problem of timing seriously. They have exploited it maximally and effectively in order to make their genocide in Tigray to reach at this stage. On the other hand, the Western world didn't give a damn about the timing of whatever the measures they have been taking so far. Now, let's look at two things. Number one is these evil forces have managed to escape any kind of sanctions so far for about 10 months. The war has taken already 10 months. In these 10 months, they have managed to avert any kind of sanctions or pressure from the Western world. Why is that? They have used, for example, their diplomatic maneuverings, their deny and delay tactics in various ways to evade whatever pressures that have been put on them from the outside world, and especially from the Western world. If we confine ourselves to Biden administration, think about it. Even though we were glad, we were relieved when the Trump administration ended, and the Biden administration entered the White House, Biden has been sitting on the problem for about 8 months without doing anything substantive. People miss that because the fact that he's sympathetic, to the victims and stuff like that, the fact that they have been doing some kind of symbolic gestures have been fooling people that somehow the government of Biden is doing something to alleviate the problem inside Tigray, but nothing substantive have happened except these empty gestures, like, for example, sanctioning General Philippos. Who gives a damn whether General Philippos remains in Eritrea or outside Eritrea? He doesn't even have a penny outside of Eritrea, But it gives the impression that somehow the United States is concerned enough to do something. The other thing that the Biden administration has been doing is this commotion, of sending one envoy after another to Addis Ababa with the same message, as if changing the messenger would make a difference. One is Feldman, and then the other guy from the Senate, and then the last one was Samantha Powers, And this also gives an impression that somehow some serious thinking is going beside the White House, behind this White House measures, but nothing. Literally, nothing has been done until now to solve this problem. So who is succeeding in the timing? Again, it's Ethiopia and Eritrea. Ethiopia, for example, the second one is that Ethiopia, besides averting, any kind of sanctions, meaningful sanctions to be imposed on itself from the West, people also forget that the money that Ethiopia is using to conduct this war of genocide comes mainly from the West. Again, so there is this illusion. For example, if you ask people who is obstructing, from finding a solution to Tigray, the people will keep pointing at Russia, China, India, and so forth. True, they are being obstructive, especially at the UN. But nobody expects anything good to come out from these nations because they have similar problems in their own country. What matters most is that the West has been financing, literally, I'm saying, has been financing this war of genocide. Without the financial aid Ethiopia is getting from both US and EU, it wouldn't have been able to conduct this war. US probably gives almost $1 billion, to Ethiopia every year, and similar amount of money comes also from EU. But look at this now. If you ask them, they will tell you, but no, we are doing this, only to help, on the humanitarian aid. It comes quote unquote under humanitarian aid, but it's, for example, health system, COVID, for famine, food security, education, and stuff like that. And we are not helping the war effort of Abiy. But that is totally false, because money is fungible, and Ethiopia has found a way of channeling these aids that get into Ethiopia from these places into its war effort, its war chest. For example, let me give you a recent example that happened almost a month ago. The Ministry of Education in Ethiopia openly, I'm telling you this openly, it's not even a mystery, openly said, proudly and openly said that it's donating 10 million birr to whom? To the Ministry of Defense. I mean, think about that. The Ministry of Education doesn't produce anything. It's not a business, or it doesn't have a factory. Where does it get its money? If you ask me, most of it comes from the West. Now, this money is being channeled openly to the Ministry of Defense. So they have found a way of channeling that money. That's number one. But it goes beyond that. For example, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that is almost monitored by the West itself. Recently, it provided Ethiopia with an emergency loan of $411 million. Think about that. Emergency loan. Now, armed with that amount of money, what did Abiy do after that? He was shuttling, back and forth to Turkey, UAE, and he was on a shopping spree to buy new kind of armaments from all over the place in the Middle East, Turkey, Azerbaijan, even Israel, the latest. And whose money is that? The money provided by IMF itself. So for all practical purposes, the West has been providing the financial means to conduct the war of genocide against Tigray. That is the fact. That is the underlying fact. So we have to know that. Now, to get back to the timing, okay? We have this, what do you call, the Biden's executive order. Now, even Biden's executive order, Ethiopia and Eritrea has factored in that at the end of the crisis, when the crisis in Tigray gets worse, when it becomes a cause celebre in the world, pictures will come out now of people dying in their places, if emaciated bodies and stuff like that. That's the West always, careful about its optics. It will react. It will react, and it will probably put meaningful sanctions on them. They have factored it from the long time ago. What they have done is, if we could keep the West away until the crisis starts, reach at its critical stage, then we can weather out any kind of sanctions imposed on us for about 3 or 4 months. That's all that we need. That window of 3-4 months to kill at least, let's say, hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans through starvation, or even 1 million of them, to kill 1 million of them. That's all we need to weaken Tigray, to bring Tigray to its knees. So even if they impose these sanctions, it will only be for about 3 or 4 months. After that, we could declare, okay, we'll agree on negotiation and stuff for us, because by that time, Tigray will be too weakened to protest against any kind of negotiation that is openly biased against them. So all that I'm saying is, to go back to Biden's executive order, unless it's backed up by an independent mechanism on how to deal with the mass starvation, with the famine going on in Tigray, it would be a useless one. It has to be backed up. When I say independent, I mean one that does not depend on the consent and agreement of Ethiopia. For example, they would declare a no-fly zone over Tigray right now and start using air transportation directly, not dependent on Ethiopia, which means it doesn't have to go through Addis Ababa, because all kind of bureaucracy is being used the same way they have been using to blockade any kind of food aid to enter into Tigray. It has to be done independent of Ethiopia's influence, which means the flights have to go directly to Tigray. That's one way, but that's not the most effective way. That's not the cheapest way. The cheapest way, the most effective way, the one that could reach throughout Tigray, is to force Eritrea out of Western Tigray and use that corridor with Sudan to alleviate, the food aid problem to 6 million people in Tigray. That, to me, is the most important part. If the West had the will, it could do that within 24 hours. It could give serious warning to Eritrea to get out of Western Tigray and tell them that we are going to use it as a corridor to feed the people of Tigray. They could do it. So far, they haven't shown any kind of will of doing that. And I believe primarily it's because the West and the US also are worried about the stability and unity of Ethiopia above and over the genocide that is taking place in Tigray.
How does opening up a corridor in Western Tigray, translate to disunity or disability?
No. Yeah, I understand your question. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But that's how it works in their mind. Because you see, what they are saying is, if we force the Western Tigray to be opened, then Tigray will be fed. Tigray will have probably a resurgence as a result of that, and Tigray won't be amenable. For example, one of their worries, one of the Western worries, is that Tigray will probably secede because of this genocide that's going on in Tigray, and they don't want that to happen. So if they are going to hold hostage Tigray in order to make it accept to remain part of the Union of Ethiopia, then unwittingly or wittingly, they are using the same means of encirclement that the enemy is using to bring Tigray to its knees. So that way, you see, you could see that they are prioritizing Ethiopia's unity and stability over the crisis inside Tigray. So it's a kind of Faustian deal, you could say, because if Tigray gets, a border with Sudan, then the possibility of it getting separate from Ethiopia is higher than when it remains encircled the way it is right now. So probably on the back of my mind, there is this suspicion, especially EU, who never, for example, who has never demanded for the Amhara forces, to get out of Western Tigray. It's probably that idea. One of the reasons, we'll come probably to the other reasons later, but one of the reasons I believe is that it wants to make it impossible for Tigray to secede. And it's using the same tool the Ethiopians are using to force Tigray to come to that kind of agreement.
Could that be also the reason why in this recent executive order of the US President Joe Biden, this call for the Amhara forces to withdraw from Western Tigray is missing?
That's exactly, because EU has been working hard, not to include that. Another organization that has been working very hard not to do that is the ICG, the International Crisis Group. A group that has been working against Tigray's interest from the very beginning. This is a group that has been, for example, have had Ambassador Ghebrehiwet, that notorious person, as its senior advisor for many years, and now has Haile Mariam Desalegn in its board of members. So it has that conservative tilt, you know, and it's primarily concerned, you could say that it's primarily concerned again on Ethiopia's stability and unity. Its latest, I saw that in Eritrea Hub, its latest recommendation to the UN was to put pressure on Tigray, so that Tigray doesn't insist for the Amhara forces, Tigray, even Eritrean forces, not to come out from Tigray through force, but through their will. Imagine Isaias, Abiy, and Amhara forces out of their volition, out of their good intentions, leaving Western Tigray. You could see exactly how evil that intention is, and somehow they have sold it to the United Nations. The last time the meeting was conducted in the United Nations with Guterres, of course, who's also siding with Ethiopia. So I am disappointed that finally the US seems to be buying that argument. But behind that argument is, as I said, one is, of course, to force Tigray not to secede. The other is probably the migration problem. We'll come to that because it has kept the migration problem inside Eritrea. Inside Tigray, precisely because of that, and the European Union also to have that in mind. So I think we'll come to that later, but it's a general when we talk about the genocide, and we'll deal with it. Okay, all right.
How has the war been conducted in terms of its main goal, both when the war was confined in Tigray and now when it's being conducted outside Tigray?
Well, I mean, as we have mentioned before, at least as I have mentioned before, it's clear the intention from the outset, from the very beginning, was genocide. From the very beginning was genocide, and its target was the entire Tigray population. It was not confined to the TPLF or even to the TDF. It was meant to make a victim out of the entire Tigray population. And what was the strategy? The strategy was rather simple. It was encircle Tigray, the entire encirclement of Tigray, and then finish it off. It was as simple as that. You could call it, had it not been diabolic, you could call it elegant in the way it was planned. It was an engineering feat, I would call it, on how to conduct genocide at this day and age. So they had this idea of encircling Tigray, no information comes out of it, no person comes out of it, nobody knows from the world, nothing comes in, and in the meantime, you have to create a means of finishing off these people. Let me start with try to explain it this way. In its design, this strategy, in its design, it has a division of labor in it. That division of labor, sometimes it overlaps, but not redundantly with one another. But mainly, each group specializes in one thing, and they complement one another. The forces being the Amhara forces, the Eritrean forces, the Ethiopian force, and the government itself. Okay, let's look at the Amhara forces. The Amhara forces specialize on ethnic cleansing, as no one else specializes, and it's for obvious reasons. They want Western Tigray totally. They want to evict any Tigrinya speaking in Western Tigray out of Tigray. Out of Western Tigray. Okay, now they have used, of course, as soon as they entered Western Tigray, they have used all kinds of brutalities, from massacres to mass rapes to burning of villages, emptying of villages, and so forth and so forth. And also another unusual mark on them was the expropriation of everything the Tigrayans owned in the land, especially the farmers, farmlands, huge farmlands, livestock, crops. In the end, even the homesteads themselves, if they are to evict them, they have also to expropriate their homesteads. To understand the magnitude of this problem, think about only the livestock. More than 2 million livestock was stolen from or taken from the Tigrinya-speaking people of Western Tigray. Last, of course, is the displacement. They have displaced more than 1 million people. Imagine that. They have displaced more than 1 million people. Now we find them in IDPs all over internal Tigray, like Shire, Aksum, Mekelle. These people that have been displaced, okay? What is the aim of all of this? Of course, beside removing these people and replacing them with Amharas, which is, by the way, something that has never been done in post-colonial Africa. You find this kind of thing only in fascist societies. For example, in apartheid West Africa, that has been done, and in Nazi Germany, what they call it, Lebensraum. Lebensraum means finding a space, that expansionist trick that we see among the Amhara elite right now. If you look at the Amhara Khalil, it's trying to swallow up everything around it, even in Sudan, in Tigray, Mekelle. Not only that, it's swallowing up even internally elements that it believes go against its expansionist philosophy. Things like the Ago, Kamant, or the Oromia, the small Oromia by the southwest of Wollo, Ago, Awi, and all of that, So it's part of that expansionist streak that we see right now among the Amhara elite. Now, if you look at this thing, what you see is the aim, the strategy. Let me put the elegance of the strategy, quote unquote, the elegance of the strategy is that all of it is aimed at once you displace 1 million people and they are put in IDPs, they will be dependent on food aid. And once you cut that food aid, you starve them to death. That is clearly what they were doing. The same thing happened on the Eritrean side. Although the Eritreans did also their portion of ethnic cleansing, since they didn't intend the Eritreans to inhabit those areas, it was not as thorough as the Western Tigray. But they did their share in what? In multitasking in all kinds of crimes. For example, as they fight, they keep massacring all over Tigray thousands of people. And they say mass rape was also their specialty. But their main specialty was destruction and looting of various things, like, for example, food sources, health centers, factories, businesses, universities, homesteads, and religious and historical sites. When the Eritrean troops pass through any part of Tigray, it's as if a barbarian horde of the medieval times have passed through. It's a scorched earth approach. Now, what has that caused? Again, it has displaced hundreds of thousands of people with the same purpose as in the Amhara, of what the Amhara forces have done. In addition to what the Amhara forces have done, also the Eritreans also focused on the urban areas. They try to destroy all kinds of employments that is provided to the urban population, which means they are also preparing them for mass starvation. Now, if you go to on the federal type, it has its federal troops, which were copying everything that the Eritrean troops were doing. But in addition to that, the Ethiopian government had at its disposal a means of cutting off different kind of services. The people as a power vested on it. For example, the denial of service would include internet, news outlets, telephone, banking, medicine, food aid, electricity. For example, if you shut off electricity of one city, you put the entire economy on halt. Even the water services would come to a halt. So they used all of this ruthlessly in order to complement the Amhara forces, the Eritrean forces, and the federal forces in what they were doing. So that's why I said it's a well planned out genocide that is happening in Tigray. So the net result of this was the displacement of more than 2 million people. The entire the Tigray population has been almost 6 million people has been made food insecure, and probably almost 1 million people are on the verge of famine, with many of them already started dying. They have also wiped out. They have made sure, before they left Tigray, to wipe out most of the food sources in the country, and they have also made sure that to destroy all kinds of the health system of the country. Now, on the first, this is while they were within Tigray. So for them, or even for us, as you look at it, it was mission accomplished. They have done what they set out to do. Now, what came after that was after the Wafri Alula Abadega, they were evicted, they were forced out of Tigray. But to them, even though they hated the fact that they were defeated, they saw a victory as within the defeat. They saw the silver lining. They saw this victory, because now they said, okay, now that we are out, and we have done all that we could, to prepare the people of Tigray for mass starvation. All that we have to do now is encircle it, because while we were within Tigray, we can't cut off all the services, because we have to use partial. They also need to use the electricity, water, and other kinds of services. They have to pay the federal workers. So the banking system was, it was not always working, but it used to work somewhat. So now that we are out, we could cut off every service. We could make our encirclement thorough now that we are out of it. All that we have to do now is encircle Tigray. Do not let the Western Tigray is especially the Western Tigray is very important in this, because we have to make sure that we do not leave Western Tigray, because if they find an opening, in that it means that the siege, they have found a way out of their encirclement. So we'll have to do everything, to keep Western Tigray. Eritrea also had changed its fighting mode. It has always been fighting by fighting while preserving its army because of its demography. It has a small demography, 3 million people, and almost 500,000 youths have escaped the country in mass exodus in the last 10 years. So they can't afford, to have a huge toll. So one of their primary driving motive is how do we fight against Tigray while preserving our army. They have been doing that after after they were forced out of Tigray. Number one is they have stayed all along the border from Shire to Adgrat. They have made sure that they are always in a ready to invade, with their tanks and with all the stuff, so that the TDF wouldn't know when they would strike. That way, they have tied up tens of thousands of TDF soldiers along the border. These are the soldiers that could have gone to Ethiopia and fight, and they would have made a difference. So without firing a shot, Eritrea has tied up tens of thousands of Tigrayan soldiers. And when that was not enough, it went further to occupy Western Tigray, relieving tens of thousands of Ethiopians and Amhara forces to fight in Amhara, and hoping at the same time that the Tigray front is not at this time doesn't want to open two fronts, and they are right, so they are still they have still managed also to do this without firing a shot. But even that was not enough. Now it seems, it's trying, it's entering the fray inside Tigray. So in the second phase, what we are seeing is this encirclement process at its best. Now, there was one miscalculation in there in this war. Of course, they for example, the federal troops, because they were hurt, because they had a big toll while they were fighting inside Tigray. They wanted the time to reorganize themselves. They thought that Tigray would keep after keeping, keeping their land, they would remain within Tigray in defensive position. But that was not the case. Of course, Tigray wouldn't allow them to reorganize and come back. And then, of course, it has to find out a way out of encirclement. And this is what we see right now, I would say.
It's very interesting. Talking of technology now, at this age of technology, it seems that denial of technology and services had a role to play in this in conducting this genocide.
Yes. In fact, it's fascinating. I find it fascinating in a way. I mean, social scientists, or let's say historians, used to say that totalitarian systems were impossible in the pre-modern era because the totalitarian leaders lacked amenities. They would lack amenities that only modernity could provide. Things like, for example, radio, television, telephone, the roads, railroad, even the modern army, the security apparatus. All of this is only possible with the technology modernity provided. That's why we never hear in history totalitarian systems before, for example, Hitler arrived in this world. After that, we see Stalin and Mao, and others also followed, of course. So, to me, to some extent, this is also true when it comes to genocide. I don't mean that genocides didn't happen in pre-modern era. They did happen, but it has been made easier to conduct genocide in the modern era because of the technology available. And now, in the post-modern era, with the advancement of the technology in leaps and bounds, it has even become more easier to conduct genocide throughout the world. In fact, I consider Tigray the litmus test, the first one, where the post-modernity technology is being used to conduct genocide. Let me give an example of Abiy. Abiy, as you know, I consider him to be a total idiot. He is a man who consults religious gurus. Imagine religious fundamentalist gurus, like Daniel Ghebrehiwet, that notorious fascist, or some high priestesses from evangelical churches like Prosperity Church. He consults them for political guidance. This guy consults them. He's a charlatan who wrote an incoherent book, Medemmer, similar to Mao's Red Book or Gaddafi's Green Book. He's also, his aspirations are also out there for everyone to see. He wants his royal aspirations to be, he wants to be the seventh king, prophesied by none other than his own mother, And he's also a pathological liar. I have never seen, in every speech that he makes, you could count a number of lies embedded in it, This man, now think about this man, this imbecile, have what he has at the tip of his finger, the power that he has at the tip of his finger because of this post-modern technology. Think about the on and off switch that he has in Addis Ababa. he could use it to cut off electricity to entire districts from Addis Ababa, especially because the Ethiopian electric power system is dependent on hydro dams, on scores of hydro dams, and its power transmission. The power center is somewhere in Showa. I don't know exactly where it is. It could be in Addis Ababa or somewhere near it. And they have a way of switching on and off entire Killil. If they wanted, for example, now to darken the entire south, they have a means they could do it within a second. Now, not only that, and of course, if you switch off the electric power to the entire area, you have halted the entire economic activity of that area. In addition to that, internet, water, telephone, banking. I mean, they could do it from their city. You could imagine there is something like a clinical cleanliness to it. He doesn't have to see the suffering of the people. He could wake up, Abiy could wake up in the morning, do some kind of push-ups, take a shower, eat his breakfast, and goes on, switches off an entire area of a Killil, goes back, laughs with his wife and children, and life goes on. So there is no consequence to him, in doing all of this. So that part is very important, that there is no consequence to what they keep doing from that seat of power. Now, think about another section, part of it that has been used in this war is the drones, how the UAE uses drones, to annihilate Tigray. It has played a major role in the genocide of Tigray. Now, think about also the same guy, another guy another leader in Dubai, he doesn't even know what Tigray is. It has been, Abiy has asked, he said, okay, we can do this, we can drop bombs from our drones. And then again, there is a cleanliness to it, a clinical cleanliness to it, because he doesn't have to see the blood or the horrors that are going on in Tigray. He does it from the seat of his home. So there is no consequence. Usually, if UAE wouldn't volunteer to send even 100 soldiers to Tigray, that's obvious. But it could do it this way because it has no consequence to it. There is no consequence to it. So this kind of thing has been going on in Tigray for a while. I believe this is a prelude to coming genocides in the 21st century. And but there is also another side to it, because Abiy has shown how to fight this war, how to fight a war in 21st century. Now, his adversaries, for example, TDF, is fighting an old war. It's fighting even the road it is taking is the road that it has taken 30 years ago. I'm not blaming it for undertaking that because it has no other option. But eventually, I believe, if not TDF, the other forces inside Ethiopia will figure out how to fight a 21st century war the way, because Abiy has shown the way how to fight it. For example, as I said before, Ethiopia is thousands of miles of crisscross transmission. I mean, the power transmission poles are everywhere in Ethiopia, especially in the southern part of Ethiopia, where most of the powerful dams are situated right now. For example, Gibe 1, 2, 3 are the ones that provide most of the electricity throughout Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia is vulnerable because it's easy to cut off one of these lines, and darken a whole province or even the entire city of Addis Ababa. They will figure it out sooner or later. They will figure it out the way Abiy has figured it out, that he has this much power in his hand. They will figure it out also that to fight this war, in fact, almost bloodlessly, as is the case of Abiy, without consequence, and probably, that's the way this war will end, because Addis Ababa is a city that lives in its own stratosphere. If it doesn't have a consequence on its own, it doesn't get a damage. For example, that tens of thousands of Amhara peasants are dying, that tens of thousands of Huzboch people are dying. So the only way it will feel it is if it goes dark, and that can be done by cutting off those power transmissions from this hydro dams.
But don't you think this will leave millions, almost tens of millions of people suffering? Because we are saying people are suffering in Tigray because of this denial of services.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but I think what I think is the moment it's done, that is when peace will come. It's not. I don't think Addis Ababa can afford to even stay one day in the dark and fight this war. Huh? He doesn't. You are in fact denying him, the power that he has in Addis Ababa. So to me, it is that the moment Addis Ababa goes dark is the day peace starts in Ethiopia. So it's not as if, the people will go on fighting after that. I don't think so. Because once they see it, then once they see it that the other side is using a similar power that they have been using on the others, then there is no other way to fight. I mean, there is no other way to go on fighting in this war. It would be impossible for Addis Ababa to conduct the war it's conducting now once it goes dark. So I believe that it will bring peace, instant peace, in fact, bloodlessly, not the way the TDF is doing now, because it's taking a huge human toll. For example, the TDF is going all the way is trying to cut off the Djibouti Addis Ababa road for the same reason. But it's being done. It's taking a huge human toll on both sides, on the Ethiopian and the Tigrayan sides. And it's no guarantee also, because even if he cut off that problem, that idiot in Addis Ababa, he could still say, I'll fight on. Not only that, Djibouti also, there is no guarantee that Djibouti will say, okay, now I will deliver aid to Tigray, because it's also dependent on the road for its survival. So there is no, there's not even a guarantee, that it will solve the problem. But that other means is almost if they do it, it's almost 100% sure, that this war will come to an immediate halt. So, well, that's about the technological side, I guess. Go ahead.
Let's talk about the reaction of the world now, the AU, UN, EU, US, to the genocide in Tigray from the start, with a focus on the West's reaction. That's the most consequential.
All right. Okay. Well, if I have to use a phrase, the world was waiting for Tigray, from the very beginning. If I am going to use an irresponsible phrase, it would be the world was waiting for Tigray to just roll over and die. So they took it as a nuisance, If this part of the world just rolls over, then everything could have been okay. That kind of attitude was almost on all the major players that we usually consider to be responsible ones. Let me start with AU, that inept organization. Remember when Musa Faki Muhammad at the beginning said that this is a AU, by the way, this is a AU Commission chairperson. He said that he fully supported Abiy's law and order mission in Tigray. He, like those religious nuts that nowadays are endorsing the war in Tigray, he was the first one to endorse the war in Tigray. Imagine, this is AU. And the UN, also take the UN, for example, because there is some kind of duplicity, dubiousness in Guterres himself, Remember that infamous line where he said he believes Abiy, Abiy told me, despite the fact Now, in retrospect, people, when they look at it, many departments of the UN has been warning Guterres. They have been telling him that is not the case. But he, despite all the information that he had, he went ahead and said he believed his friend Abiy. Not only that, even later, when this was found to be wrong, there was no remorse on Guterres. What he did was he used every opportunity to humanize Abiy. For example, if 100 trucks of aid, enters Tigray, he made sure, even though for one man there was no convoy that entered Tigray, he made sure to advertise it so that Abiy comes out of that occasion as someone who's really concerned about Tigray, and that he's trying his best to help Tigray. And then notice one of the greatest things that Guterres did to help his friend Abiy was when the humanitarian crisis was in Tigray became evident throughout the world. He quickly said that he will form a commission in tandem with Ethiopia. Imagine a genocider is being invited to investigate the genocide that it is being conducting inside Tigray. Anywhere else, this would be madness. But because it was elevated and spoken with authority and concern, that dreaded word that we hear all the time, officials talk about Tigray, it seems as if he's really concerned. But what he was doing was he was subverting the investigation itself intentionally. He was subverted before it was, and we have seen the result. The latest report in the UN, by the Ethiopian Humanitarian Commission was exactly what Guterres intended when he declared that he will create a humanitarian commission from both from the UN and Ethiopia. And now he's still doing at it. And now, for example, he has intentionally again outsourced negotiation to AU, that notorious organization that endorsed the war against Tigray. He did it intentionally because he again is working against Tigray. Now, why? And if you look at his various technical stallings within the UN itself also, you would wonder, why is this guy doing all this? Deep down, I believe he's an Ethiophile who wants to, as that dreaded phrase, unity and stability of Ethiopia, and he doesn't give a damn about the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. The other organization is, for example, the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, that organization has shown not the slightest bit of remorse after anointing this imbecile, as with its Nobel Peace Prize, and it has given him, especially at that time, the necessary cover to conduct his, to prepare his war, to do all the kinds of preparations for his war. For example, without Nobel Prize, I don't think he would have been able to rehabilitate Isaias. Again, the UN, the UN, when it prematurely lifted the sanctions of Eritrea, the sanctions that was imposed, the arms sanctions that was imposed on Eritrea, then it means that Eritrea was free to buy all kinds of armaments. So the UN was instrumental in rearming Eritrea. And how did this happen? Part of it was because the Nobel Prize provided the necessary cover for Abiy to rehabilitate. You see how they are interconnected with one another. And when we come to the US under Trump at that time, I mean, they were practically cheerleading Abiy. Pompeo, the ambassador to Ethiopia, Michael Ramour, and the other one is Assistant Secretary of Africa, Tibor Nagy. I mean, these were the three, the three musketeers defending Abiy at that time. I mean, the things that they were doing were, for example, they were they took that they believed, or even if they, because I believe they had a better information, but they said that the Tigray was committed a crime by attacking the Northern Command. They bought the narrative of Abiy, and then they went further when TPLF fired rockets to Asmara. They said they use the word, it is internationalizing the war. It is provoking Eritrea, it's internationalizing the war. Even though at that time, already Eritrea was deep into the northern part of Tigray, massacring people. I'm sure that as these three musketeers were uh, uh, helping all they could to cover, these atrocities, the atrocities inside the things like the massacre of Aksum, where almost 800 people were killed. The massacre around Shire, where more than 1,700 people were killed, were taking at that time, at the beginning of this war. Yet they were claiming that this harmless. I mean, they did almost nothing. Those. I was against them because they were. I thought they were not doing anything, and then it would be used against the TPLF. But thinking about condemning TPLF for firing those rockets while these kind of atrocities were going on, and the Americans knew, they had all the information at this time. And then there was also, I think it was Tibor Nagy, who brought also another narrative of Abiy. He used to say that this will end quickly. In 2 weeks it will be over, and he was more or less happy with it. It's more or less, that roll over and die for Tigray was proclaimed by Tibor Nagy. Now they began to change their tune slightly when they knew that it was taking a longer time. And the other thing they knew was that the extent of the humanitarian atrocities, not that they cared about the humanitarian atrocities, but that the world came to know the extent of these humanitarian atrocities. Only then they began to change it. So why were they doing this? Was it a concern of democracy? Absolutely not. The little bit of democracy that was there was in Tigray, not in the rest of Ethiopia. So it was not that was there. Their concern was they were trying to help Abiy consolidate his power in Addis Ababa. And they thought that Tigray has come on the way. It's an obstruction and it has to be eliminated. That was their main concern. And why would they want Abiy, their darling, because they were instrumental in bringing him to power, Why were they concerned, There were many reasons, but the main reasons was this is a guy who will veer Ethiopia away from the Chinese influence, was one of their main reasons. Another one was for them, he was saying that he will liberalize the economy, quote unquote, which means that he will veer away from EPRDF's developmental state. So that was also appealing to them. But other factors also, which we now consider probably seems irrelevant, but then worked. For example, the evangelical connection. The evangelical connection was important also here because Pompeo was an evangelical. And Abiy was always, people have said that he used to brag about his evangelical connection with the White House, which means Pence, the vice president. Even those factors have played a role in doing this. That is what I believe. But in general, though, if we have to get away from these personalities, why was the West, how did the West react to this, I see three things. One is, I have mentioned a little bit, was its rivalry with China, and at the same time also with with regional forces, like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Iran. These were this began to act like mini superpowers in that area. So it doesn't want to leave that turf to them. Although now and then it overlaps its interest with them. So for security, political, and economic reasons, they felt that they should help Ethiopia on this side, on this one. They should remain on the Ethiopian side. Another big issue is migration. We have mentioned a little bit before. Migration, for example, especially in the case of EU, it looms large in all its foreign policies. It's the driving force. It has become now the drive, especially after the demise of Syria. With billions of Syrians, entering Europe. And the political crisis that they caused in Europe, especially with the right-wing parties becoming more powerful as a result of that of the migration crisis. Now, the EU, for example, let's go back to Western Tigray. Remember that, if we had, for example, if remember there were at the beginning there were about 60,000 of Tigrayans that were forced to leave Tigray to Sudan. Okay, I don't think the Amhara forces would have minded to drive out probably 1 million of them to Western Tigray had the Abiy government not realized it soon enough. Yeah, the Abiy government realized it soon enough. The problem. First of all, the atrocities that were being conducted inside Tigray, the refugees became a voice for those trapped inside Tigray, and the world began to hear their voices in Sudan. So they have to stop that. But it's more than that. There is an evil element to it. There was a Faustian deal, I believe, a Faustian bargain between Ethiopia, unspoken Faustian bargain between Ethiopia and the EU. Had they had 1 million refugees, for example, entered Tigray, I am 100% sure that the EU would have aggressively worked against. To find a solution to this humanitarian crisis. So, anticipating this, what the Abiy government did was it sent an unspoken message: we are not going to let that happen. We'll take care of those refugees inside Tigray. That is the reason why we have kept them inside Tigray. Of course, the Abiy government was doing it with the final solution in mind. The thing is, what we have to look at is EU. What was it thinking? So is it saying, I will just shut off my eyes so far as they don't show up in Europe, But in addition to that, though, there is also the idea that if Ethiopia disintegrates, or if the problem, expands towards Ethiopia, then millions of Ethiopian refugees will come out from Tigray, from Ethiopia. That also would be a big headache to Europe. So it seems as if the deal is, if we can keep the Ethiopian crisis, before it's happening, by keeping that crisis within Tigray, So Tigray is becoming a sacrificial lamb. We could even go ahead and cold-bloodedly calculate if have 1 million Tigrayans die, but as a result of their death, if it could be avoided, all that kind of refugees from coming out from Ethiopia and Tigray, then probably so be it, would be the conclusion, although not consciously, calculated. So in general, you see, what I see is this, okay? In general, we see the incremental pressure that the West has been applying against drip by drip pressure on Abiy. The reason why this doesn't work is because genociders don't work drip by drip. Genociders have all or none attitude. the very phrase final solution is because they want a total solution. There is no such thing as half genocide, a quarter of a genocide. When a genocide arises, he sets out to do a total solution. He's in search for a total solution. A good example would be Daniel Kibret, the last time he talked about. The speech that he gave is with a final solution in mind. So the idea of putting drip by drip pressure on a genocider is nonsense because it doesn't take into account the state of mind of genociders like Abiy, Isaias, and the Amhara leaders. The other thing is it goes also against the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Tigray. It's an extremely urgent crisis. It doesn't work drip by drip. Nowadays, we have heard about 600 people dying every day, So it takes a different. Why are they doing this? Why is the West doing this? It's not that the logic of this is lost on it. I don't believe so, But it has to fool itself. Look at this, for example. This is what they have been doing. If you have carefully followed this crisis, they have never acknowledged that what is going on in Tigray is genocide. Because if they acknowledge that it is genocide, then they would also acknowledge that the kind of pressure that they are putting on Abiy is futile. So by not acknowledging genocide, they are saying Abiy is not genocider. If Abiy is not genocider, it means that he is amenable to pressure, that somehow he will listen to pressure at one point or another, which is not true. Even though they know this, they have been doing it because, as I said, either because out of laziness or out of even cold-blooded calculation, out of concern for Ethiopia's unity over the massacre in Tigray, for various reasons, though, they have not been doing it. Thank you.
Okay, you talked of the drawbacks of the executive order of President Joe Biden. What strengths do you see in this executive order, and why do you think the government of Tigray accepted it? Welcome.
Well, okay, I'm not sure whether it has the government that has accepted it totally. I'm not sure, I haven't heard yet. They have shown, their goodwill to it, but I think there are still some points where they disagree, especially on the western part of Tigray, for example. The idea that Eritrean troops or Amhara troops would remain in western Tigray is probably the most, the worst part of this executive order. Anyway, I do believe, this executive order is, a good thing because it bites, unlike the symbolic gestures that have been done before. It meant really, it targets, not only individuals like General Philippos, but also businesses, entities, government companies and stuff like that. So it has a real bite to it. Now my problem is, the timing, as I said before, is this executive order, if this executive order is meant to stop the war, in general, yes, I can understand, how it will be a driving motive, although I'm not sure that they will do that, given that they have also, on the other side, on the Ethiopian side, that their goal has yet to be met when it comes to the genocide in Tigray. Else than that, that's why I don't want to focus on the strengths of the executive order, for one thing, it has been there, throughout medias, Ethiopian, Eritrean, Tigrayan medias, and also world medias, they have been talking about it. There is nothing new I can say when it comes to its strengths, so that's part of it. But to me, there are two things that I want to say about it. One is, I've already said, the timing, without looking at it even, the timing is if it's meant only to prevent the spread of the war, in Ethiopia, well, that may or may not work, but still there is a logic in it. I could see the logic in it. But if it is meant to put, a stop to the mass starvation in Tigray, I don't think it goes far enough. That's why I said it has to be supplemented by other things. The other thing that I see about this executive order is the idea of negotiation, reconciliation, or negotiation. To me, it's very hard. I mean, this would look very strange because even the TDF accepts, I mean, even the Tigrayan part accepts this. The idea of negotiating with a genocider, and the victims, bringing them into a table, while the intention of genocide is there, while the genocide is still going on. It's not as if, we are having a reconciliation in the way it happened in South Africa. South Africa, the enemy has already been defeated, only after that you have a reconciliation. But the idea of reconciling a genocider and a victim, I don't see any precedents in history. I don't see any precedents in history where a genocider is being made to sit with his victims as the genocide is still going on. So to me, this remains a puzzle. There is no formula of how this could happen. That to me is probably one of the biggest questions that I have with this, because I could understand, for example, if the West works on how to make Abiy go, for example, force him to resign. I could understand that. Then probably, the rest of Ethiopia could reconcile with Tigray in many ways. But the idea of having, for example, think about the Western. Let me go to Western Tigray again. If you leave the Amhara militias there, as the EU wants, as the ICG, that notorious organization wants, then what we'll have is the genocide that they are conducting now. You'll keep going on doing that. The Takaza River has been where the bodies have been are still coming out from the Takaza River. They have almost about 10,000, as CNN said, already in prison, and they are bringing them out. Probably they have killed thousands of them. Few of them have made it to through the Takaza River to Sudan, but the rest have been killed somewhere else. So how is it possible you could conduct a negotiation while still leaving genociders to do their genocide? In fact, if there is a peace agreement, if an ongoing, it could take, months or years, that peace agreement, that would be a perfect environment for the genociders, for the Amhara forces in Tigray, in West Tigray, to resettle or to make a huge settlement of Amhara peasants in Western Tigray. So the idea, that's why I'm saying, the idea of reconciling or conducting a negotiation between genocider and its victims is absolutely nonsense. They have to have another means of negotiation. I don't know what it is. That's one of the problems that I have with this thing, because as I said before, I always had this suspicion, on the western part of, especially on the EU, that holding Tigray hostage, for negotiation, it would serve that purpose, that thing, or make it impossible for Tigray to secede, preventing migration. All of these are, the ulterior motives that come into it, So the reason why I'm focusing on I don't know how to put it, exterior and the interior, let's say the content. I'm not focusing on the content of the executive order, precisely because the preconditions kind of keep subverting that content. They make the content irrelevant, If the content of the order, is not timely, then it becomes irrelevant. If the content of the order, for example, makes it doesn't put into consideration the nature of the negotiation itself, bringing a genocider and its victims together, then that content, even without seeing it, becomes irrelevant. That's why I keep coming back to that again and again. Okay, yeah.
Recently, in response to the executive order, Abiy Ahmed wrote in an open letter in which he said the TPLF caused the 1998 to 2000 war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and
Jesus.
it was decided by an international court of war who started the war. Why do you think he said that? It's a kind of rewriting of history.
Well, of course. I mean, that wouldn't be a surprise at all. You know, the guy has been rewriting all the history. You know, they have been trying to wipe out the 27 years of EPRDF rule in Ethiopia. Even as you know, facts like, for example, Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa was. A hodgepodge of villages, you know, before EPRDF showed up in Addis Ababa, you know, but they don't give a damn. I mean, those elites, you know, who are only concerned about their ego, you know. If they are there to demonize TPLF, they have to wipe out the history in between, and well, part of that would be this one. The 1998 war is caused by TPLF, even though everybody knows, you know, the belligerent character of EPLF. So to me, that's not surprising at all. You know, I mean, he has done worse. He has done worse than that. So I don't think that we should even comment on this further. All right.
And finally, recently you wrote a poem about these what you call love notes. You know, the thing that Tigrayans and Eritreans, you know, tie. And if these love notes were to, you know, go down the Merab River, which separates Eritrea and Ethiopia, the common border, Tigray and Eritrea. What would these love notes send? What signals do they send to the people of Eritrea and Tigray? What do you see as a strategic interest of these two peoples?
Well, I mean, you see, when I wrote that poem, I had in mind, you know, the richness of the culture of Tigray. You know, that doesn't mean to demean the richness of the culture on the Eritrean side or even on the Ethiopian side. You know, generally, there is a rich culture throughout that area. But I wanted to focus on Tigray because that's where the you know, the civilization, you find it still there intact in Aksum. The religious, the spirituality of that nation, you find it in all the Adbarat, Gadamat, the monasteries, you know, those wonderful monasteries in Tigray. You find it in those miraculous rock-hewn churches of Tigray that number more than 100, you know, in Garaalta, in Tembir, and other parts of area, you know. And then also the culture itself, you know. The agenda that we talk about that Tigrayans are so proud of, you know. You also find it a little bit go further in the south among the Agos, among the Lasta people. And if you have a little bit of north, you know, we used also to have our own agendas in Sarai, in Akologzai, and in other areas, you know. So there is this unity among the people. For example, the monasteries of Eritrea. Almost all the monasteries of Eritrea were built, you know, either from the Abbas. They came from outside, you know, like Constantinople and Syria, the 9 saints, you know, that goes back to the 5th century, or other saints that came from Tigray itself. And even from Gojam, there is, for example, one Dabona, we call it in Sarai, that was founded by a Gojami Abbat, you know, Abba, I mean. And then there is the house of Estatios, for example, you know, the Estatios, how Estatios from Gara Alta came to Sarai to find the first biggest Coptic movement in the history of Coptic Christianity in Ethiopia, and he spread, most of the out of those 12 monasteries that we found now in Sarai were built by the House of Estatios, by his disciples, and it goes on and on. The idea now, that the very people, when the troops of Eritrean troops, entered Tigray to destroy the very monasteries that built monasteries in Eritrea. And I mean, it doesn't make sense at all. The madness of it, the madness brought by this, by Gedli, by this revolutionists, by colonialism, the idea of the colonial influence from the fascist influence on Tigray, on Eritrea, and all of this, how they have destroyed the life, the life form in that area. So that's why I wrote, for example, about the love notes, for example, even in Eritrea, it's the same thing, I have also seen Amhara kids, small kids, they have this ma'tab, and then you see that an aunt comes, with her own wish, and she has lehtit, for some reasons, and another one comes with dgam, and there is another love note, this love notes, denote, the rich historical, religious, and cultural roots, the common roots of those people. Only if you go back to that, could we have and retrace, our commonness, could we have peace throughout the region? That is the main point of that poem, and hope with that note, with that love note, our conversation is coming to end. Thank you.
I think let's end it with that cheerful, very lovely. And thank you very much, Yosief, for this very enlightening and analytical reflections. Thank you for coming to.
All right. Okay, thank you, and I hope TV Tigray will invite me again one day. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It would be an honor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.